Okay, right. I'll do a quick intro and then we'll jump
No,
right
no.
into it. This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and I've forgotten what else I am. Oh, film critic. Yes, I'm not really that much of a film critic anymore, to tell you the truth. I write reviews are probably the least of my output at the moment. But anyway, I am a writer. That'll do. That covers a multitude of sins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Brian Baker, formerly of Lancaster University, with many publications to his name, and also someone who experiments in art in a serious ways. Had some exhibitions and um, uh, beautiful stuff. I remember years and years ago when we lived together, Brian, you used to paint little like I've got several of them still, birthday cards for me. They were all
Yeah, yeah,
scenes from movies.
yeah. That's right. And back then, I did a series of comic book kind of fake comic book covers as well for some of our friends, and yeah, I didn't have I've still got my sketchbook actually from when we lived together, with stuff in it that I painted then. So yeah, it's quite nice to go back and kind of and think, oh yeah, we were living in Liverpool back then. So kind of yeah, so yeah, it's something that I've since I left Lancaster last year. It's something that I've been increasingly immersed in. I would say is that kind of thinking about where I live, partly in Wales, through art practice, not representationally, but more kind of dynamic, kind of. So I'm very influenced by modernists really and vorticists and trying to think about what seems to be a very rural place, but in fact it's deeply embedded in an industrial history, which
Mm.
is, if not forgotten, then sometimes isn't really part of what people think about when they come to visit here.
I'm always surprised as well when I was the place I come from is in the countryside and we're about 10, 15 miles south of the Lake District. Um, but at the same time, we've got on the crest of the fell, we've got quarries, old disused quarry mines, which were basically quarries which we took out the slate to build the farmhouses and the houses of the row that we lived on. And so you could sort of point at a cavity in the hillside and then point at a house and go, those are pretty much the same size.
Yeah, I mean, about 5 miles from here, there still is a working slate quarry, and you can go up there, and there are spoil tips of the slate,
Mm.
which you can just wander around on and get bits of slate, quite large bits, which are just not up to standard of what they want to use it for. But yeah, kind of around here, there's the Poncasilty Aqueduct, which was one of the wonders of the world. It's a World Heritage Site. The brick building was common around here. It's got canals. It's got everything. So yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How just like where you grew up, a seemingly kind of fairly isolated rural place actually is really kind of embedded in a whole series of industrial histories.
Absolutely, and also down towards the sea, there was the Askham Brickworks, and there
Mm,
were big buildings in Liverpool where we lived, which were made by the Askham Bricks. So it was kind of weird connections that
exactly.
between industry and rural.
Yeah, and in fact, the Rooaben, which is a kind of town fairly close to where I live, they're very famous for a very hard red brick. And if you've ever been to Cardiff down on the bay, there's a very large building made of red brick, and the Victoria building actually in Liverpool too, is made of that brick. So they're kind of all over Britain and parts of the world actually. Kind of this very famous hard red brick is a common sight. And if you want to drill into it, you burn out your drill bits extremely quickly because it's hard as nails. This stuff.
Right, absolutely. There's a word of advice. God, you come from the film books. Stay for the stay for the drill bit
So for the
advice.
DIY tips.
Home improvement included. Um, Absolutely wonderful. Well, today we are doing something a little bit different because this is going to be part of a mini series which we're going to do in the in the coming months, every now and again. It's an occasional mini series, shall we say, where we look at writers and their works being transformed into cinematic work. Also, maybe not only adaptations, but the spirit that they embody influencing cinema, and cinema also having an influence on writers, or a completely sort of intertextual intermedia approach, if you like, where the direction of travel is in both ways. The first of this series is going to be the British science fiction writer uh, and postmodern writer J.G. Ballard, who, of course, probably I would say most came to fame with a series of disaster novels, which saw a variety of apocalypses. Usually on a global scale, such as the Drowned World. Um, well, help me out, Brian. Give me
The Drought,
the
the
Drought, of
Crystal
course.
World,
The Wind
and they're
from Nowhere.
which was the one he disavowed. That was his first published novel, and he kind of said after he kind of he wanted it left off the Ballard lists, kind of. So you can still get it, but kind of it was kind of he kind of thought it was a bit of a bit juvenile, really.
Right, right. Yeah, I have read that actually quite recently, and I did think it was a little bit silly, but not bad.
No, it's more indebted to that 50s cozy catastrophe tradition than what would come later, where he kind of twists it, starting with the next one, which is the Drown World. But yeah, that's right. It's still got a lot of that 50s SF catastrophe kind of stuff in it, and it hasn't quite got the Ballardian flavour yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I do think there is more of a connection between him and John Wyndham
Mm.
than I previously suspected, in the sense that maybe earlier I sort of dismissed John Wyndham a little bit, and reading him more recently, I sort of think, ah, no, he's doing stuff. He's not to be dismissed.
No, and the other one is John Christopher, who was also writing late 50s, early 60s, Death of Grass, and The World in Winter. So I think that might be 62, same year as The Wind from Nowhere. So yeah, so that another one of these, but he's whereas Wyndham is full on what Brian Aldiss called cozy catastrophe, where the world ends, but people are kind of driving around in their MGs and staying at the Hilton. With John Christopher, it's pushing into slightly more problematic areas, psychologically, I think, and Ballard just pushes that a bit further, really.
Yeah, yes, I can see. Yeah, I definitely can see that. In he also wrote a series of autobiographical works, and um, towards the end of his career, it seemed that he'd sort of almost settled into. I'm thinking of Supercan and books of that nature. He'd sort of settled into a formula, if you like, of a certain type of location, a certain type of closed society, a certain type of guru, and you could sort of see that in Supercan, you could see it in Cocaine Dreams, you could see it in a whole series of his books.
They come in kind of periods, really, and you can see them in kind of clusters. It's a bit like Burroughs, who basically would write a huge kind of pile of stuff, and then it'd be all edited into different novels. With Ballard, there's a kind of so you have the early ones, as you said, the kind of disaster novels. You have then you have a kind of series like Concrete Island, Crash High Rise in the 70s, which relocate it into an urban sphere. And then the late ones, as you suggested, which is Cocaine Nights, Super Can, Millennium People, and Kingdom Come, they're all kind of based. They're much more modern, cityfied, but they're often like kind of industrial parks or science parks. That was a very Ballardian. But science parks or industrial, kind of enclaves or gated communities
I was just
where
about to say gated communities as a yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that starts with a really lovely little novella that he writes called Running Wild in 1988, which basically rehearses all of the ideas which will kind of be taken up in this kind of quartet of ideas and themes. But in a sense, I think that's why some people think that Ballard's quite a repetitive writer or has quite a limited palette because he does have these kind of periods in which he's clearly rehearsing a kind of set of issues or ideas, and character types rather than actually what we might understand from a realist novel as characters. He uses a kind of set of archetypes really, that populate all of his novels, particularly the kind of the protagonists, as we'll talk about, no doubt, as we go along. But they tend to form these sets. I call them sets. There's a Ballardian set, and kind of in a sense set and setting. The setting tends to kind of be located in these groups, but the sets tend to be the same or have a similar kind of pattern narratively, or in terms of the conflicts, or what he's kind of talking about in terms of the ideas and that kind of stuff.
Okay, let's start with the first film on our list. Well, we're not necessarily going to be exhaustive here because, although I think we'll probably mention pretty much everything that has been filmed, but there might be things we leave out. If so, apologies. But Empire of the Sun is, in a way, a strange beginning for Ballard on screen because it is a filmmaker, Steven Spielberg, who has a reputation at this stage for making blockbuster Hollywood entertainments. Although I think that doesn't do him. I think, well, this will come out no doubt in our conversation, but I think that's a simplification.
Mm,
And J.G. Ballard, this postmodernist, rebellious, much more aligned with the counterculture. Burroughs, we've just mentioned, he would be a huge supporter of Burroughs and someone who would
and
very
vice
much.
versa.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This also is taken from a novel which is based on his experiences during the Second World War, which aligns with Spielberg's own fascination. This is, I think, his
Mm,
third Second World War movie because he's already made Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1941. Um, and he will go on, of course, to make Saving Private Ryan,
mm,
which is probably the peak of his
mm.
fascination with the Second World War. Kind of Schindler's List, although I would hesitate to call that a war movie. It's much more a
Yeah.
period movie that is set
Mm,
at the same time as the Second World War.
mm.
Generically, I think those things are distinct. What do you? What's your take on Empire of the Sun, Bry?
Well, just to kind of contextualize it, it's one of several novels that Ballard wrote. There's another one called Kindness of Women, and he also wrote a kind of much more straightforward kind of autobiography called Miracles of Life towards the end of his life, all of which play quite fast and loose with the facts of his own biography. So, I mean, it's true that Ballard, he did grow up in Shanghai, in the international settlement. But when war came, he wasn't separated from his family. He was with his parents in Longhua camp. And so there's a kind of interesting dramatization, but also I think there's a kind of a game with the reader who knows Ballard's work, because throughout both the book and the film, there's a whole series of images like the crash plane, the swimming pool, the camp, which are kind of offered to us as kind of the books are kind of roman à clef. It's a way of which in Ballard's offering us the key to his own narrative sensibilities, but it's really just another game. About the kind of this isn't the real Ballard, Jim Ballard's kind of real narrative. It's a fiction,
Mm,
um, and I think approaching it that way makes much more sense of Ballard's own very high praise of the film when it came out. Because when you watch it again, you kind of think this doesn't seem very much like Ballard. Where's the distance, where's the blank effect, where's the psychological kind of oddness, weirdness going on. But in a sense, I think the fact that it's filtered through Spielberg's sensibility allows us to think of it as a war fiction, literally as a war film, and therefore playing around with some of the kind of the emblematic scenes of a war fiction. I think the crowd scenes when the Japanese arrive in Shanghai, the kind of the camp scenes, the famous Mustang scenes when they attack the camp and all that kind of stuff. These are kind of emblematic, but I'm not sure whether we need to take them as a kind of they're part of another set in a way. A
mm.
kind of and the set here is Hollywood spectacle war film.
David Lean
Yes,
scale
yes,
drama. We get the crowd scene that looks like a crowd scene,
yeah,
whereas when you're in a crowd scene, it doesn't feel like that at all. Your actual scale, your vision is constricted. It's very claustrophobic.
absolutely.
You don't have crane shots in real life.
No, and there are plenty in that crowd scene. I kind of watching it again, kind of this morning. There are lots, either from literal crane shots or from rooftops, where
Mm,
points of view are kind of located up above, and so we're having this kind of split spectatorial regime between what you and you think really to make it really claustrophobic, you'd stick with Jamie, who's who's smaller than everybody else, and if it just was this horrible press of coats and legs and all that kind of stuff, but it's interesting how Spielberg releases the claustrophobia by having these crane shots, by giving us a point of view from which to organize those street scenes. Now, why do you think he does that, John? Why do you think he does move us away from the kind of the claustrophobia that Jamie's feeling
I
and the
think
terror?
I think there's always that sense that you have to have with Spielberg that he's aware of how wonderful stuff looks, and that
Yeah,
sense of wonder. This is why which I sort of hinted at earlier. This is why I think he's far less of a sort of warm and cuddly filmmaker as people sometimes like to make
yeah,
out. I think he likes to see sort of legs being chopped off in Jaws, or a man being sort of swallowed by a dinosaur. It He finds that kind of stuff quite funny if it looks neat.
yeah,
And so even when he's looking at, and I think there is a genuine problem sometimes in Schindler's List, in that director, that like which has the German soldiers playing the piano while they're in the middle of a massacre, and someone leaning around the corner and saying Beethoven, Chopin, and that tiny vignette is so deep and so interesting and such a dagger into the heart of like the idea of culture changing you and improving you,
yes, yes,
that sometimes it just we skip over that sort of stuff, and how also how also the black and white and everything makes it into an aesthetic thing
yes,
that
mm,
somehow doesn't contain the horror. In some ways, it is a counterpoint to the horror. And I think the same thing is true in a sense. I think Jamie is such an amoral young boy. He's so carefree, but also careless of
yes,
his parents, of the people around him, of people generally, that in a sense, almost like even in a state where you imagine him to be panicked and worried and all the rest of it, you could imagine him sort of disassociating him from the moment and thinking, how cool would this look from that building over there?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I also wonder whether kind of, I mean, when I'm watching kind of Spielberg films, I always feel as though there's a kind of embedded spectatorial quality to them. He often puts people kind of standing around watching something, whether that's in Close Encounters or when things emerge from the streets in the aliens in War of the Worlds, whether people just stand. It's almost as bad as Robert Altman. We always has people standing around and watching stuff, and so I thought I wonder whether that was part of that as well, where the crowd are almost watching themselves. There's this weird spectatorial circulation going on in those scenes.
Also, the witnessing of Hiroshima later in the film,
Yes,
it has to
yes,
be witnessed for it to have happened. It has to be a cinematic thing, and I totally agree with you. I think that inscription of the audience within the film, um, I think that the key scene you've already mentioned, where he runs up the tower in order to
yeah,
see the plane go by, he is essentially being the camera. He is
yeah,
essentially
yeah,
saying he is focusing in on something. And in the book, he will say, this couldn't possibly have happened that the guy turned and waved to me, but it seemed like he did. And it's
mm,
sort of like it's admittedly to some degree a constructed memory. In the film, it's like this is the most filmic. This is the trailer shot.
yeah, absolutely,
This is a
yeah,
shot you're going to have in Barry Norman film whatever it was, whatever the year
Yeah, yeah,
was.
film 88 or what it was. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And why
Yeah, no,
not?
I completely agree. Interestingly, the kind of the thing with the witnessing Hiroshima is that it's impossible to see Hiroshima from Lunghua. So again, that's a fictionalized moment. It's kind of if truth is witnessed, there's no possibility of witnessing in that. So it's, again, I think that's really interesting what you said about Christian Bale running up and down in front of the um, in front of us, essentially, isn't it? He's almost like
Mm.
he's leapt out of the audience just in front of the screen, and he's running up and down while the Mustangs are kind of flying past. There's a kind of curious leaping over the fence, kind of almost in that particular moment, where he's almost between us and the film.
Absolutely. And this is going to sound a bit odd, but think about this film as being autobiographical for Spielberg rather than for Ballard.
Yeah, I think that's
All of
right.
that playing with toys, playing with airplanes, zoom
Yeah.
zoom forward to the Fablemans and see how does he portray his own introduction to how to make a film. It's by
Mm,
getting a train set and crashing the pieces together. And so
mm,
there's always this sense that the root of Spielberg's talent is trauma, is the excitement of trauma
mm,
and the excitement and spectacle of trauma. So he experiences, and he'll, as he grows up and he matures, that will become the divorce of his parents, the affair and the divorce, which is also catalogued in The Fablemans. I mean, not a great film, because I think personally it's way too on the nose. I prefer all of those issues to be in Close Encounters of the Third Kind or E.T., where the
yes.
where the home is destroyed by other things, but it's all standing for the home being destroyed by divorce. But when it's actually destroyed by divorce, it's like, oh, boring. I prefer it when it's destroyed by aliens.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great point about trauma and how it relates to this novel and Ballard in particular, because trauma is really important in the way that what happens to Jamie. But trauma is not a big thing in the Ballardian canon. It's more this kind of lack of effect, which is kind of
Mm.
always there. It's not as though kind of and I think that's true of kind of Jamie as well, that he's not a sensitive little lad who suddenly becomes this kind of traumatized stick man or monster. In a sense, he's always been like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the first thing that is sort of like his comeuppance is the maid of the house sort of slapping him,
that's right.
and you're kind of on her side. You're kind of
Yeah,
thinking,
yeah.
it kind of tells you more about him than it tells you about her. It's
Yes.
like he must have been a right, for that
Little
woman
git.
to, yeah,
Yes.
exactly, for that to be her parting shot of a
Yeah,
child
yeah.
that she knows is now probably in quite a bit of danger, to be like, I'm not going to help you. In fact, I'm going to slap your face off. I
I
mean,
mean, the reaction shot's interesting there as well because Bale, his face is not shocked; it's angry. He's full of this repressed rage that you can't do anything about. That she's overstepped so far as to slap him around the face. Kind of as a kind, in terms of his position of entitlement, which I
yeah,
think is again is that's very. I think that's nicely handled, that particular scene there. I think that is quite subtle in a way that a lot of what we'll talk about in the whole episode really is, I think, kind of there's a lot of on the noseness with
mm,
regard to staging Ballard, and so some of that subtlety of that tension between psychology and trauma, or what's real and what's not, kind of gets lost, and it's probably because of the filmic medium itself, really.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, as you say, he's not really traumatized. He goes to the camp, he meets up with the John Malkovich character and the Americans, and he's having the time of his life. This is
Yeah,
absolutely
he's on a whale of a time.
thriving.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, that's right. I mean, so it becomes a playground, doesn't it? In a
Mm,
sense, the camp. Whereas I think in reality, it was much more. It was British. He wasn't. It wasn't with a bunch of loose American soldiers. He was with a whole bunch of families who were kind of, kept putting blankets in between the dividers to make sure people once weren't seeing their legs when they were having a wash. So kind of all of those class strictures were transported to Ballard's real understanding of it. Whereas this is a kind of fantasy, really. There's an interesting thing with Peter Pan, I think, and the fantasy of boy escape, which lurks somewhere in the Ballard psyche. Because Running Wild, which we mentioned earlier on, is like that as well, where children actually do their parents in and escape. So there's
mm.
this odd kind of little kernel of that idea kind of nested in a few Ballard texts.
Well, isn't that the fantasy of apocalypse? Isn't that the sort of Thanatos lust of, you
Yeah,
know, let the world end so I can be a baby once more. I can just roll around in my own poo and,
yeah,
I don't have to
yeah,
brush my teeth.
yeah. And if I'm 13, don't have a driving license, I can drive a car anyway.
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
exactly. I mean, there's something that links it to Home Alone. He's, riding his bike around the house, and
Yes,
I mean that seems to be a real obsession with the '70s movie brats. There are loads of scenes of kids taking over houses, the Goonies, and
yes.
John Milius in The Wind and the Lion has his sort of Moorish sort of Moroccan bandits sort of riding through the colonial houses on their horses and sort of attacking
Of
lampshades.
course he
It's
would.
like, yeah, yeah. It's like they don't understand what a lampshade is, so one of them's wearing it as a hat, and it's all like,
Oh
like
man, Milius, are
Milius.
they doing it on bicycles? I'm going to do it on a horse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So very, very funny. Something very funny about John Milius. He's just
Oh, there is.
he wears his ambitions on his sleeve to such a degree, and he's so incredibly inept at times.
He wears
It's
everything on his sleeve, doesn't he, Milius? I mean,
yeah, his
his
sleeves
hang
are.
ups, his exactly.
There's a film, like a home video from like a New Year's Eve party in 1979, and it's basically Spielberg, Lucas, De Palma, Scorsese, all just hanging around in a house, and he gets a gun out and fires it through the window, and they're all saying like, "What are you doing?"
What are you doing, John? Oh
And he
man,
looks as happy as Larry. It's like
it does.
he looks like he's eaten all the cream. So, Empire of the Sun has this, on the one hand, this very prestige, Richard Attenborough, David Lean, we already mentioned, this sort of
Hmm.
prestigious sort of, what's the word for it? It's not Merchant Ivory exactly, but a prestige picture, I guess. Maybe
Oscar
I'm,
winning.
yep, yeah, yes, that's not a bad idea, which again seems to run very contrary to Ballard. But I don't feel it betrays Ballard at all. I think actually watching it in the context of Spielberg's
Hmm.
career, you sort of
Hmm.
go, no, he got it. I mean, he certainly got Ballard more than he got Alice Walker.
Oh God, yeah, 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 yeah. No, I mean, again, I think kind of it's just the how difficult it is to get Ballard on film, really. Unless you have to do it really, really obliquely, I think,
Mm,
for it to work. And I think, in terms of it turning it into the kind of Hollywood spectacle that it is. But in a sense, I mean, in a way that, as you said, Spielberg understands that. He understands the kind of obsession with technology. He understands the kind of the foundational but disavowed trauma. In a sense, that generation that Ballard comes from are kind of his parents' generation. So he kind of sees that. And he's got experience of that. So no, I think you're right, and it. I remember it when it came out, and it was definitely promoted as a kind of that David Lean-esque. I think Attenborough actually is kind of Dickie Attenborough. I think that is an absolutely spot on connection there. This kind of widescreen, serious movie about war. It's kind of in that kind of mode really. And so you end up with the kind of reunion of with his parents, don't you? And he kind of hugs his mum and he closes his eyes and you kind of think, yeah, but is he going to be any different from now on?
yeah. What
Is
have we
it's going to
what
be
have
it's
we
going to turn into
learned?
Ballard.
What have we all learned?
Well, we know that he's going to like crashing cars and writing
Yeah.
books that people think are psychopathic. That's
Yeah, he's going to kind of basically think that this was the happiest time of his life and will always be trying to get back. He's going to,
exactly,
like
exactly.
most prisoners have the nightmare of waking up and being back in the cell again, but Ballard would have the nightmare of waking up and not being back in the cell again. So he invents other forms of containment.
Well, and also considering the name of your podcast, John, it's the perfect childhood for a writer
Yeah,
because it gives you so much material to work through when you're older.
yeah.
It's turned into spectacle here, but kind of in a sense, it's the perfect mulch to grow the writer in.
Absolutely. Give me some of that mulch, baby. Give me some of that mulch. So, following Empire of the Sun, we have Crash, I think, could be the next one, a next
It
major
was.
adaptation on our list. And this, of course, comes after David Cronenberg he's kind of going through a phase, Cronenberg, after a series of really um, interesting horror movies, sort of, what nowadays might be called elevated horror, but had a fairly big whack of sort of gross out body horror in them. um he sort of moved into something slightly more intellectual. I remember John Carpenter saying he'd become pretentious at this point and everything was a
Yeah, yeah.
metaphor. But he'd made Naked Lunch with Jeremy Thomas at this stage, a little bit like Spielberg doing Fablemans. It was almost like the text is now, the subtext is now text, and
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's difficult for you to negotiate having this right out front. Crash is, I guess, is open to the same criticisms, but on rewatching it, I found it compelling. I found it interesting, and I remember when it came out at the cinema, it was incredibly controversial. It was
It was.
a
Yeah.
huge sort of brouhaha, which nowadays seems quaint.
To
What's
say the least.
it's sort of like these days of Pornhub. It's sort of like, really, that's a sex
Yeah,
scene.
it's now on ITV3 in the afternoon, in between the
I
bowling.
I put it on to keep the kids quiet.
Exactly.
Watch a bit of Crash, kids. Um, yeah. What's your take on Crash?
When it came out, I love Cronenberg, and obviously a massive fan of Ballard, and I was kind of disappointed in a way. I thought, oh, I'm not sure because he's relocated to Canada, and Crash is such a novel of kind of the western suburbs of London. It's Heathrow and all of that kind of. It's the M4 corridor,
Right.
essentially. And I thought its location was, and it becomes this kind of anywhere, kind of any city.
I was going to
Toronto, is it
say,
where he shoots it?
is it Canada? I thought it
Yeah,
it
he shoots
looks
it in
like,
Canada.
right. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Fair
yeah.
enough.
I think it's Toronto or something like that. It's for tax reasons, I think.
Sure.
He
Sure.
shoots it over there.
Tax credits.
Um, tax credits. But Ian Sinclair wrote a really, really nice BFI classic on it, which made me change my mind a bit about it actually, because I wasn't overly keen. Didn't really like the Howard Shore soundtrack. I thought it should have been much more pumping and exciting. I thought the kind of the discordant guitar work was an attempt to give it some kind of avant-gardist cred, and to diffuse the idea that this was some kind of salacious, scandalous movie, which is what it should have been, a salacious, scandalous, because that's exactly what the book is, and it diffuses a lot of that. But going back to it, it's I think it's about as good a job as you could possibly do with that book, to be quite honest. There's some really fantastic scenes in it. I love the shots, which are looking through the window of the cars as they're being driven. But the angle he takes is really odd. It's like the camera's mounted on the edge of the window. So you can see down the outside of the car. It's like looking through a rear view mirror. So you
Mm,
can see down the outside of the car and through the windscreen at the same time. And it's really quite disturbed. There's a kind of quite disorienting kind of thing. And you kind of think, oh, that's kind of getting towards this idea of there's something very odd about the psychology of driving,
mm.
that kind of, and also the zone that you move into emotionally and psychologically when you're behind the wheel. And I think some of that was really nicely handled actually. The kind of this, he doesn't go full on, kind of in terms of dislocation, but there's enough of it to be odd. There's a weirdness about the film which I think has really improved through time actually.
Yeah, I would agree with some of what you said. Definitely, I feel I agree with you that the electric guitar is a little bit like the saxophone in Naked Lunch. So, what are you going to? Which instrument are you going to use for your next picture, Howard? Because just stick to your lush strings, and soon you'll be doing Lord of the Rings, so it'll be fine. Um, Yeah, I mean, as I say, I rewatched this really recently for this podcast, and I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed it, I think, the first time. I think my feelings were similar to yours, heightened and anticipatory. And I watched it the first time and just thought, okay. And some of the sex scenes are still kind
Mm,
of ridiculous, and they're still
yeah,
kind of silly. I mean, there's the bit where Holly Hunter is in the initial car crash, and she sort of bares her boob, and it's done in a sort of like, I mean, it's supposed to be transgressive, I suppose, and you're supposed to be
perverse.
shocked by it, and it's just like, ugh, yeah. I mean, I'm never not thinking I'm watching Holly Hunter in a
Yes,
crash doing this,
yes,
and it should kind of lean into that these are all actors performing roles who are, which
yeah,
weirdly Spielberg, as we've just said, kind of almost gets more the idea
yes,
of that everybody's playing a role, and the camp is a way of breaking down those roles to the very, to their very source. um I I certainly didn't. I thought there was sort of a non-erotic element to this, but I
mm.
remember us discussing this, I think, years and years ago, and whether there is meant to be an erotic element or not. I mean, I think it's kind of debatable whether those sex scenes are even meant to be sexy, you know?
I don't think they are because I think that kind of using the word you used kind of earlier on, John. I think this is a novel about a film about Thanatos rather than about Eros. It's a film about death rather than about sex, and that's why you have that, which I think is the most ludicrous sex scene at all. Right at the very end, after she's crashed her car, and he kind of has sex with her, kind of lying on the grass.
Mm,
Maybe next time, darling. It's like, oh, no, give me a break. I mean, you go bloody hell. But I think kind of it's. I mean, and that's one of the failures of the film for me, that it's not sexy enough. This
mm.
should be a film which really challenged you in terms of a really erotic take on the novel, but it didn't. It kind of in typical Cronenberg style. It's really distanced and icy and cold, and the sex scenes aren't sexy deliberately.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you about and I think Cronenberg, as his career goes, the sort of juice leaves him, and he becomes increasingly intellectual and increasingly, because this is a guy who made Videodrome, this is a guy who made Scanners, this is a guy who
Yeah,
made
yeah.
Shivers and Rabid and films which are about lust and are about how the lust will betray you. Lust is like a virus, lust is like a disease. And then he's making these films in which sort of James Spader is is sort of is being a bit horny and spends and yet not really. And I think this goes on and on into his later films where he's obviously not getting the budget he wants, and they could essentially, this most cinematic of filmmakers could easily be consumed as radio plays.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose. I mean, because he goes from The Fly, doesn't he, to Dead Ringers, I think, and you can
Yeah.
probably see that's where he gives up body horror in that kind of way, or turns it into something else.
Mm.
Whereas, but I think you're right. I mean, if it's the Cronenberg of Videodrome making this or Scanners, then you would have had exploding heads and kind of mutilated bodies at the car crash, that kind of. But it's restraint, isn't it? It's a film about restraint, and I think the restraint is imposed because of the source material.
Mm.
Because I think kind of probably not just Cronenberg, but probably the producers, kind of understood that kind of this when it comes out is going to be a massive controversy, and they don't want it banned; they want it seen. And so I think kind of if it had been, which I would, I should have been like a real pumping techno soundtrack or something, something really upbeat and urgent, rather than Howard Shore, tinkling around on one of his old guitars. I think kind of that would have given the whole thing much more of a direct impetus and been much more challenging also for the viewer to do, because I think as it is you can kind of pass it off, and you kind of and with the perversion you can kind of say nah, I don't buy that.
Yeah, I
Whereas,
mean,
whereas it needs to poke you in the guts, and it doesn't ever.
yeah, it's sort of desiccated. There's this sort of
Yeah,
like dryness to it. No, there's no
yeah,
I use the word juice, and I was about to use the word spunk, but I just stopped myself at the
Well, there's
right
another
before it.
jism would be another good word to
Yeah,
use.
well, a Burroughsian word,
Yeah,
certainly.
exactly. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's kind of it's just not dripping with stuff the way it should be, and the characters are poring over the cars looking for blood and stuff, and you think, well, the camera could be doing a bit of that,
Yeah.
and
It's not
also,
carnal. That you want it to be
nah,
carnal, and
yeah.
that's there's not enough to do with that kind of carnality, and even the bodies are kind of they're subjected to a kind of microscopic medical gaze rather than to. There's a really interesting scene where Vaughan, Alaska Tears, is getting a tattoo, and the woman kind of says, "Oh, this doesn't seem like a medical tattoo," and he says, "It's not. It's a prophetic one, but it's in some kind of clinic." And you
Mm,
kind of think, well, what's going on here? Why is he having a medical tattoo? The body's under a medical gaze at that particular point. And you kind of think, well, that's the problem with the film. That if it wants to be dirty and ragged is what he kind of says, well, make the bloody thing dirty and ragged. Not
mm.
don't sterilize it. It feels as though that the film has been sterilized. I think in a way, it's a hygienic film about a very unhygienic book.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, even when it goes into the scenes which should be very like meta, such as the show that Vaughan is
Mm.
organizing, where he's reenacting various celebrities' deaths.
James
Although
Dean, yeah,
it's James Dean and it's Jane Mansfield, and so it's like if I shouted name two celebrity deaths to do with cars, those would be the first two you'd probably
yeah.
shout
They
out.
would, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nowadays, I mean, post this film, you would probably say Princess Diana, perhaps.
Diana, yeah.
But it just it, even there, I'm not entirely sure. It just feels silly. What, they're just going to crash into each other?
Yeah,
What's the
yeah.
fun in that? And oh, he's got hurt. Well, what the bloody hell was he thinking? Of course he got hurt. They're surprised. Oh no, he looks like he's really injured. He's just
He,
crashed into a
he's
car.
just crashed his car. Yeah, yeah. No, exactly.
And
Yeah,
it's
and then
like the world doesn't exist. There's no
yes.
one hanging around. Say, I mean, the police turn up occasionally, and they say, "Oh, it's the traffic police," but there's not even. I mean, if that's supposed to be satirical, where's the humor?
Ah, well, there's not a lot of humor in Cronenberg. A lot of times, is there? I
Hmm.
don't think. And there's
Which is why I think both Naked Lunch and this fail to some degree, because I do think there's humor in both Burroughs and Ballard.
oh yeah, there's well, yeah, Burrow certainly. Ballard's humor often though is linguistic. I think
Mm,
it's to do with how he uses language, and I think that is what is kind of the real problem here. Is that you don't have that tonal quality of the narratorial voice that you get in
mm,
Ballard, where you have then these slippages and the recurrent language in which he's telling you certain things about how to approach this particular scene. Irony, for instance, kind of how I don't think Cronenberg ever achieves the kind of double voicedness in this film, where it's everywhere in Ballard.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of you can't escape it.
Vaughan at one point says, "Oh, he died to become immortal," and then says, "Oh, was that too glib?" And in Ballard, he's genuinely going. He's holding Vaughan up as this way of introducing these ideas, but also ironizing them and undercutting them. Whereas in the
Absolutely.
film, it just looks like Vaughan's a bit of a tosser.
Yeah, a bit of a prat. Yeah, exactly.
What
Yeah.
on earth are you doing? Health and
Your
safety, man.
project is about yeah. Your project's about changing the human body. Isn't that a bit old hat, mate? Christ, I think
Yeah.
yeah, this is a bit 1950s, isn't it? Yeah. You're not going to get any money for that off the grant bodies. I'll tell you that for nothing.
I mean, one question you asked earlier on, which I want to sort of expand a little bit our conversation, is you said, "Oh well, this is the problem with Ballard. How could you film it?" I would offer the film 2021 Palme d'Or winner Titan
Yes.
by Julia de Cournau, in which it is about a woman who has somehow become melded with a car, and I mean, I think the visuals and and just what happens in this film, it's a sort of horror comedy of sorts. she's become impregnated by a car. Essentially, she's
Right.
had sex with a car, and it's all about identity and sexuality. And Vincent Lindon plays a sort of fireman who she poses as his missing daughter, and he kind of fools himself. And this links to a true crime case, which was made into a documentary called The Imposter a few years ago. Um, Really good documentary, really interesting. David Gran did the original article the documentary was based on, who also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon and
Ah,
actually quite a lot of books which have been made into movies subsequently, non-fiction writer. So he's one person, she's one person, apologies, who I think has taken the spirit of Crash and made it into something without directly adapting it. I would also argue another Cronenberg, Brandon Cronenberg, has very much with his films Possessor and Infinity Pools, especially Infinity Pool, which features a writer who is becomes part of a community in which they are effectively cloning themselves in order to then
mm,
sort of commit crimes and do and just be hedonistic. And the question is always which person is dying if I clone myself, do a crime, and then kill myself off. Who at what point have I has somebody missed?
mm,
Is it me or
mm.
is it the clone out now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think Brandon Cronenberg has the juice that his father used to have.
Mm.
Interestingly, his next film is Supercan.
Ah, well, that would make perfect sense.
But I'm a little bit
Um,
worried that, as we've been
it,
saying, that this it might be too on the nose for him. He might be someone who's better off,
doing it
you know.
obliquely.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, somebody else to mention who does achieve a kind of Ballardian kind of effect obliquely would be Chris Pettit, kind of an English director. Radio 1, 1979, is a kind of road movie, black and white, but it's largely set around the initial stuff is set around the Westway and the kind of the A40, the M4 corridor. Starts off with an absolutely beautiful tracking shot through a Bristol flat, actually set to Heroes by Bowie. But it ends up being a kind of a journey out of London. But the first hour of that is very, very Ballard. And also his film with Sinclair, of London Orbital 2002. Um, Ballard's in it because they interview him, but also there's loads of driving footage. And what he did was to kind of basically he focused on the windshield. So you can't really see the cars and you can't really see the interior, but you can see kind of the dust and that on the windscreen, and it's got this defocalized quality to it. And the soundtrack is a kind of it's by Bruce Gilbert from Wire, and it's this really collaged, kind of mediated kind of soundtrack, and it really captures something about that idea of where psychologically what Crash is about. In a way that Cronenberg can't really approach, I don't think. So Pettit is another one where he really does dip into that affect, and I think it's partly because I think kind of Pettit also grew up in a military family overseas, and so he's got that kind of sense of the outsider Brit in a way that Ballard was, so he can tune into that sensibility in a slightly different way.
Yeah, Pettit is so interesting I've just read his latest novel, Come In and Sit Down,
Right.
and it was really weird because it was just one of those the algorithm served me it up without context. I liked the title and the cover design, read it in a few hours, and then thought, oh, so this is a new young novelist. It sounds like a really fresh voice. And I Googled it, and there was a profile and interview which was by a journalist who is a friend of mine. So I was like,
Oh,
oh,
right.
right, well, okay, that's the thing. And then you've just mentioned it. It just feels like there's a, and yeah, of course, I looked at the biography and read the profile. So I found out all about, oh, yeah, he's a filmmaker. And actually, I think I might have seen two of these films. And there's, so it's a really interesting, so I'm coming in at the end of the party.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is everybody going? Why are we drinking coffee? I thought we were drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
I think that's more to do with alignment of sensibilities as much as anything else. You know, kind of
yeah.
it's not to do with adaptation. It's more to do with a kind of parallelism, which I think with Ballard is often the best way to go. It's not to directly adapt. It's to kind of to bring your own sensibility alongside his one, which I think probably Cronenberg maybe doesn't don't quite do enough. I don't know. Maybe it's which is the problem. I'm not quite sure. Is it is it too reverent? I think it could. I think kind of it could be a bit less restrained and therefore a bit more interesting.
I mean, I think what Cronenberg always does in his movies is he does these really neat static framings and then the horror happens within. And to
Mm.
tell you the truth, actually, after to me, he sort of bounced back. There was a sort of mini bounce when he came back with Eastern Promises and
Oh
History of
yeah.
Violence.
Yes.
And suddenly it seemed like he was reinvigorated because he was hitting new genres and hitting. But I think those were also kind of studio gigs. And I just think
Right.
he might be an auteur who kind of does his most interesting stuff when he's doing studio gigs, when he's
Yeah.
working for the market. You know, The Fly was a studio gig,
That's right.
and I think it's his best film. I would argue
Mm.
that it's his best film. It's his most complete movie,
Yeah.
in some ways, his most personal movie. Okay, let's move on from Crash, and I think the next one is a short BBC film called Home, which I've only watched this morning. So can you sort of contextualize it a little bit for us?
Yeah. It's from a short story. Ballard, as well as being a novelist, was a very prolific short story writer, but in bursts, and he usually had bursts of writing when there was magazine venues open to him. So he has a big burst of writing in the 1970s. So Low Flying Aircraft, which is one of the kind of the other kind of films we can maybe just touch on, is what is from that collection of the same name, but they largely and other short stories were published in a literary magazine called Bananas, which was published in the 1970s. But at points in which those venues disappear, Ballard really stops writing short stories. So in the 1980s, he doesn't write very many at all, and basically he stops writing them after his last collection is War Fever, which I think is 1985. And he doesn't write them again. It's basically because he's got nowhere to publish them, such is the life of a commercial
Yeah,
writer,
yeah. If there's no
in a
market,
way.
well,
Why
you're
write
not
them?
you're not going to work for free.
No, exactly.
You know?
No, no. So Home comes from a short story called The Enormous Space.
Right.
And it's one of those stories in which the protagonist, typical Ballard, is undergoing a kind of breakdown, in which his wife has left him. Is outside is perfectly normal suburbia. Yeah, is a kind of professional or clerical worker or
Yeah, food
middle class
technician.
food technician. Yes. And essentially kind of he barricades himself up, doesn't he, inside the house, which then begins to expand exponentially. And it's drawing upon that kind of science fiction. I think of something like Rendezvous with Rama, which is
Mm,
Arthur C. Clarke's encounter of science fiction of the 1960s, where a bunch of astronauts encounter an alien object, and it's kind of ineffably vast kind of inside and
mm.
seems to kind of go on forever. Another one would be, I suppose, with more modern thing would be something like the back rooms. This kind of idea of an uncanny space which just seems to kind of expand exponentially, or House of Leaves, Stanielewski, where
Right.
kind of they go down into the underground realm, and again it seems to kind of the further you go, the bigger it seems to get. But just like kind of other Ballard, and this goes back to the Drowned World even, and so 1963. It's mapping of the interior of the head. which
Mm.
is really what this kind of story, Ballardian story, is all about. It's about there's a story called Manhole 69 actually, which was just the reverse, where a group of men are being experimented on through sleep deprivation, and they feel the walls crushing them in. So it's the reverse of that particular story. But this one was, I was really surprised when this was made, and it just came out without very much fanfare, really. And Anthony Sher plays the lead actor, plays the lead character, and it's almost like a one-hander, isn't it? Really, he's at the centre of this kind of kind of strangely morphing kind of suburban house, which kind of is an index of his own kind of interior collapse, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, he's got this. There's this sort again, this meta fictional device of him keeping a video diary, and
Yes, that's right.
there's an element that I think. What I'm not sure what year this was made. Um,
2003, I think.
2003. So that would be after Big Brother. And so there is an element
Oh, yeah.
of reality TV perhaps to it. But it doesn't quite feel like that's an influence, to tell you the truth. But there's definitely a sense that he's giving a diary, he's doing an experiment, he's saying, sort of, day 37, I've eaten the cat, you know.
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
he's doing tastes, a taste test of the sort of horrible soup he's made himself with, like cabbage leaves from the garden and flowers and
Yes.
things. And I mean, there is an element of shock value. There's a bit of DIY dentistry, but this being
Yes.
the BBC, a lot of that is done via Elysian and editing, and
Yes, absolutely.
you're not seeing. It's all suggested. Keith Allen turns up um,
Oh, that's right.
as a sort of kind of as Keith Allen, I guess, as sort of
What
foul-mouthed.
else could he be?
Yeah, he's talents, bless him, did not extend particularly widely. Um, he turns up to repossess the satellite and TV thing and falls victim to, what the guy who's obviously becoming increasingly. But I think the thing that's very Ballardian about it is this idea of the sort of rationally insane, or the
Mm,
hyper
mm,
rationally insane. This is not someone who's
mm.
who's had a breakdown, who's not thinking logically. He's that he's thinking too logically about the wrong things. There's
Yes.
a disconnect between something. He's thinking too much about suburbia, and he's exaggerating too much in,
Mm,
an Englishman's home is his castle. Is taking it too.
yes.
There's an over literalism, to what he's.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole series of Ballard kind of short stories in they're often centered around Cape Canaveral actually and astronauts
Mm,
where a low-flying aircraft is a kind of parallel one to those where there's this kind of zone which has been created by some kind of crack in the hourglass of time or something or other, and time seems to come to some kind of standstill, and something's got in this zone. But when people go down there because they're obsessed, so there's this kind of obsessive quality to the characters in lots of these stories, just like the character in Home. That kind of turns into a kind of mapping of the self onto the spatial parameters of the environment. So they could be, they could be in a hotel room and kind of they're kind of, I wrote down the this is from one of the other short stories. The kind of their psychopathology is migrated across the tiles of the shower stall. Um, uh, and
My psychopathology often emigrates across the tiles of the shower stall. I did so.
or the bowl of the bidet or whatever it might be. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, but I think that's this Ballard mode, which is
Right.
not perversion, it's not kind of trauma and that it's this idea of the boundary, the porous boundary between the inside and the outside, and
Mm.
basically the kind of the infinite space between the kind of the 6 inches of the skull, really.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of playing that out with this very sort of white bread middle class Stevie Smith suburbia as well. There's
Yes.
this very Britishness to it. I mean, one of the things that keeps coming back in Home is everybody wants to interfere, but not that much. Everybody wants to explain their concern,
Yes.
but not to a great extent. It's very much, are you okay? Yeah, yes, I'm fine. See you soon. Bye bye.
Blood stains all down the shirt,
Uh,
kind of.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
precisely.
all right. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'll cut myself shaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a really interesting film. It's an hour long, and I think it does really encapsulate the perfect sort of short story thing. But it
Yeah,
is also like Concrete Island and High Rise to some degree. It has also that sort of Robinson Crusoe in the middle of a very highly populated modern urban context.
yeah. One of his crucial intertexts is that Robinson Crusoe. Absolutely right. Yeah, the kind of the shipwrecked kind of man. And that's, I mean, it's totally Crusoe, isn't it? What he tries to do, which is to deal with his own breakdown logically. You know,
Absolutely. He even catches a cat at one point and says, "Oh, I found my Friday." So,
yeah, yeah, there we go.
intertextually, it's a complete. And then he eats it,
And then
obviously.
of course, yeah, yeah, yeah. Wouldn't be
Cut,
Ballard without him eating it.
cut to him, sort of like cut knife and fork and drinking a glass of wine. Yeah.
Picking
Ah,
his teeth. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, oh.
Excellent, excellent. Reminds me of Harlan Ellison and The Boy and His Dog.
Yeah, yeah.
There was another film that's just come out in 2025, which was actually based on a video game, a Japanese film called Exit 8, which just reminded me very much. And it's a similar thing that a guy is in a subterranean multi-level car park, and he keeps going through exit 8 and appearing at the
Right.
same place as he's in some sort of spatial loop,
Some loop. Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
somewhat like the Cube as well, and another sort of more science fictiony version of that. There was a film recently I saw, an American film from about 10 years ago. Oh, what's the title now? So anyway, listeners if they've seen it, might recognize it. But it's there. A bunch of friends get together one evening to sort of for a party, and they're talking. And there's one of the friends that might be, might have problems with addiction, and the other. There's the usual sort of different dynamics going on. And at some point in the evening, something strange has happened in the sky, and they all go out. And when they come back in, and then some of them apparently are not from the same house, they're not the same people, and it's like they work out that they keep sending people out, and then the people who come back are people who've been sent out from another house but are the same
yeah.
people. And it's
Right.
so wonderfully, it just keeps you going for 90 minutes in that you know bizarre mind fuckery way that is it can be really frustrating, the Cube, or it can be really enjoyable.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, you didn't have a budget, or you had a really good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and we should give an honourable mention to a version of Ballard's, another one of his unfilmable novels, which is the Atrocity Exhibition, which is actually a collection of short stories that he wrote in the late 1960s. And this was made into a very kind of experimental film by Jonathan Weiss. But it had a soundtrack by Jim Thirlwell, who was known in the 80s for, yeah, for the fetus, burning fetus on the wheel, and other kind of, if you remember them. It's quite an interesting. It looks a bit like a
Gristle, did he
TV
go by?
movie.
Did he have some sort of band name like Gristle?
No,
Scraping.
it's It's always fetus. So there's
Ah,
versions of
okay.
fetus. Yeah, Jim Thirlwell. Yeah, you're not thinking about Throbbing Gristle, are you?
That's what I'm thinking about. Yes.
Yeah, no, they predated that.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They were different. But talking, yeah, they would have been really interesting. They were quite connected up to Ballard and things like that, actually, in
Right,
that kind of
right.
alternative culture, the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Mm.
The research books, if you don't know if you remember them, which were produced out of San Francisco. They did a special edition on Ballard, but they also were doing a lot on industrial culture and Throbbing Gristle and that
Mm.
kind of stuff. So there's interesting, the kind of connection. They were into Ballard and Philip K. Dick and all of that kind of stuff. But this atrocity exhibition, again, it wasn't widely disseminated or anything, but it's very interesting. It uses collage, repetition. It's got that very kind of odd glassy look of kind of 90s or 80s 90s kind of video, shot inside something which looks like a kind of a cast off set from Miami Vice or something. Lots of grass and white paint, kind of it's Michael Mann aesthetics. But it works very well, and it's kind of obviously it's not meant for a mainstream audience, but kind of it gets the kind of really shattered, dislocated quality of those particular texts. But I think that's where. I mean, it's very direct in its use of kind of a modernist aesthetic and kind of construction. I mean, it means it's very hard to handle for a mainstream audience, but that's where a direct approach formally to Ballard does work. In a way, it just means it's pretty niche.
Yeah, and I wonder if sometimes that overly literal translation of Ballard is in a way missing the point because he's kind of doing it to make novels more like cinema. So
Mm,
if you double down on it, you're actually, he's doing it in that way in order to overcome the potential staidity or conservatism of novels, So you don't you could have a similar effect without necessarily going so far out on a limb.
yeah, yeah, I think that's right. And Ballard, I mean, he was very interested in filmmakers like Chris Marker, for instance, back in
Mm,
the 60s. So La Jetée was he kind of was one of his kind of key films that he enjoyed, and I think that kind of idea of the interface between a kind of experimental storytelling in image like La Jetée and modernist experiments in prose was where kind of Ballard was drawing from, really.
mm.
It's where those things kind of come together, I suppose. And so lots of his more experimental formal fictions that they're kind of collages in a way. They're using the kind of the structural dislocations of that's possible in film to tell stories in a different way outside of the realist continuities of mainstream fiction.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny because something like Joyce's Ulysses as a novel feels really experimental, but in a way, what he's doing is very cinematic. He's cross-cutting, between various narratives,
Absolutely.
and he's creating montage, and he's doing, you know, it was not for nothing that the first commercial cinema opened in Dublin was opened by James Joyce.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go. A little bit of Joyce in it. Got to have a bit of Joyce in every single episode. Um, finally, our the last film that we want to look at is the most recent direct adaptation of J.G. Ballard, which is Ben Wheatley's High Rise, starring Tom Hiddleston. I remember when this film came out, kind of enjoying the first half, feeling it sort of went off the rails in a way which was perhaps inevitable.
Mm.
Um, but in some senses, in some senses, it was kind of like, good effort, sort of full marks for effort, but didn't quite pull it off. What was your,
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, when it was like Ben Wheatley, he's going to make High Rise, and then I saw the poster with its kind of allusions to Clockwork Orange, and I thought, oh, he
mm,
gets it, he gets it. This is going to
mm,
be 1975. It's going to be a kind of version of that kind of 1970s futurism and all of that kind of stuff. It's going to look like Rollerball, kind of. And then no, I'm not that keen on Tom Hiddleston anyway, but. I don't know. It just. Well, I think one of the things about High Rise is it starts off with this kind of phrase about, Dr. Lang looked back upon the events of the last few months as he was eating the last of the dog, and it's kind of and it's kind of an utterly kind of alienating, estranging kind of moment right at the beginning of the novel because it's puts right in the very forefront that Ballardian technique of normalization. What
mm.
people have been through, they now think that kind of eating the dog is completely and utterly normal. Um, and and that's so hard to do in cinema, I think. It's really hard to get the either a kind of glassy superficiality of effect or something which is so radically transformed, but yet is inside a bubble enough to think that, oh, well, it's just everyday life, day to day, we get on with it. And I think the film kind of inevitably, I think you're absolutely right, turns into a kind of fairly straightforward vertical dystopia, and you just kind of think it's not really getting it. I don't think. Um,
With all the
you know,
actors being exactly where you'd think, yeah, of course, Jeremy Irons is at the top. Of
yeah, at the
course,
top,
that guy
yeah,
is
yeah,
there. The up and coming actor is the charismatic sort of guy who, yeah, no, I know what you mean about literature having, it's a cold day in April as the clock struck 13
but
and Winston Smith came out of Victory Apartments. There are things that I was listening to a conversation with Philip Pullman, and he said he quoted George Eliot and said she occasionally took the carriage to town. How do you film that?
yeah,
He
yeah,
said there
true,
is just
yeah,
some
yeah,
things that prose can do effortlessly, and as we were
mm,
talking about Joyce earlier on, there are some things that film can do effortlessly, and
yes,
it has that problem. For me, the entire problem was this version of BFI set 1970s. It was like the BFI version of 1970s, by which I
yes,
mean everything looks like a freaking advert. Everything is brand new and polished and like it's just come out of. I lived through the 70s and everything was grimy. Tomorrow's World looked grimy. Even Tomorrow's World looked grimy. It wasn't this
that's
there's this
interesting.
sort of shiny nostalgia. I'll tell you something. Look at like one of the richest men uh, at the time, David Bowie, traveling through the world. He's got yellow fingers, he looks like he probably smells a bit, and
Teeth
he's
falling out.
and he's one of the beautiful people. He's one of the best. He's the
Yeah,
best we've got. You know, it was a sort of
grubby.
grubby,
It voiced,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. There's a really interesting moment. I was watching it again, and I kind of thought there are references to Action Comic in it. So, what a
mm,
young girl is reading Action Comic, which was it was prior to 2000 AD and is and Battle Comic. It was 1975. It had lots of comic strips based on Jaws and Dirty Harry, and it was banned. It was basically kind of got into massive censorship problems, and it was banned. And this girl's kind of reading this copy, and I thought, oh look, Action, 1975, what a marker! But it's pristine.
yeah,
And of course, these things, kind of Action Comic, it was printed on the filthiest newsprint you can imagine.
absolutely,
Kind of it was color inside and a center spread. And once you kind of had handled it once, everything was black with newsprint. Your fingers were black, the outsides of it were black, and this thing was pristine. And I think it totally emblematizes to what you just said. That kind of you have this kind of pinpoint cultural reference, which is Action Comic, that only a few people really going to pick up on. But yet it's not right because it's not dirty, it's not
yeah.
grubby, it's
All the
not.
cars in the car park are new.
In
Everybody goes.
1975 they weren't.
Are you kidding me? I mean, this is what Francis Ford Coppola does so well in the Godfather is he knew that the cars had wooden bumpers. Because there was a metal shortage because of the war, so that he
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
cars had wooden bumpers,
wooden bump.
and it's just that sort of don't make the cars new. In 1975, people don't have cars from 1975. They all have cars from 1965 that they've
Yes,
owned for
yes,
10 years.
yeah. There's
You
Vauxhall
know,
Victors and Ford Cortina Mark Ones. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
precisely,
With
precisely,
the odd Austin Maxi, kind of for the up and comer, in
exactly,
brown, of course.
exactly, and everything rusts much more easily then,
Oh,
and
instantly,
exactly.
yes. You get it out the car showroom and it's beginning to shower rust all over the place. Yeah, that's
I
right.
mean, if you want to know what like new houses look like, watch Gary Oldman in The Firm showing people around houses, and you'll see that
Yeah.
even when they're cleaned up and on display, they still, don't look that great. Watch Abigail's
Well,
Party.
really, I mean, yeah, I mean, and I mean, I think that's really interesting because if you did look at the kind of the modern era set films from early Channel 4 films, basically the housing stock is going to be 1975. The interiors are going to be 1975. It's only a few years later. Most of them aren't going to be kind of shiny and spangly in 1980s yet. They're still
No,
going to have the same carpets. kind of and that's right. So kind of that's what I mean. 1975, it really is. I mean, it's the null period, isn't it? Really, it's kind of there's not much going on in Britain at that particular point.
Lots of
Lots of fun.
strikes.
Lots of strikes. Yeah, yeah. If you look at the charts for 1975, you kind of the pop music charts. You kind of think, what is that doing in there? Who was listening to that?
Alistair
Uh,
MacLean was top of the bestseller list.
yeah, exactly. Tower Inferno. No, that's 74, isn't it? But it's that kind of there's a kind of shoddiness to 1975, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah.
If Royals kind of building would have been built, it would have been falling down already in 1975 within
Right,
weeks.
right. Which is kind of the point of the book. That everything immediately starts to go wrong.
To
It's
fail.
like
Yeah, yeah.
it's not about this pristine, tower. It's about this thing that kind of doesn't work
Yeah,
and
it's a
is
wretched
faulty.
mechanism. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Um
yeah.
so yeah, I mean Ben Wheatley has really been he's kind of like a talentless Orson Welles in that he started okay and then got and then started doing the Meg 2. I mean, come on, the Meg 2? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's
Oh
uh,
man, you just slipped your kicking boots on there, man. Good
well,
Lord.
it's very well doing one for the money, but yeah. Oh no, I mean, I am being really unfair. Down Terrace was wonderful. Kill List was wonderful. Sightseekers was very good. Although he was kind of filming a play, really, so that was. Um, but yeah, Free Fire. This
Hmm.
then he's really just not trying after a while. Where what does he remakes Rebecca for Netflix,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
he has Army the Hammer Cannibal, Army Army the Cannibal Hammer, sorry, and he doesn't use that. I mean, surely
No.
surely he could have done something darker.
It wasn't a big success, was it? High Rise. It kind of it didn't. It wasn't a flop, but it was. I don't think it kind of garnered what perhaps it was expected to when it came out.
It didn't break
Um,
out. It didn't do the sort of, cool Britannia thing of
mm,
traveling. And I don't think,
mm,
I mean, I think everybody was sort of thinking of Ben Wheatley as being like, oh, he's going to be this cult filmmaker and he's going to make these cult films and this will be one of them. I mean, to go with one reference you've already made, if you look at Clockwork Orange, there's a grimy movie,
oh yeah.
you
Well,
know.
it's 71, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's only just before High Rise is meant to be set. Yeah. And
Yeah.
what's the estate? The kind of the famous estate, the kind of that they filmed the remember
Don't they
Clockwork
use
Orange
it? Do
on?
they use it in like? Is it Milton Keynes or it's somewhere out of London, isn't it? The estate.
Yeah, south of London. Yeah,
Yeah.
where kind of the scene where
He's
he
walking along in the morning to walk back
yes,
to the flat.
yeah, yeah, and all of that, and then where he hits the other droogs and pushes them in the water and that kind of stuff. There's kind of that's I can't remember the name of it now, but that's this kind of post-war utopian place, which is kind of that's what Ballard was kind of trying to identify in 75, wasn't it? Is that that very quickly that kind of post-war utopianism becomes center. They fall down.
Yeah. Ex-
They fail because the building materials have been shoddy. The kind of the deals that have been done to make them have been, what you said before about cement and talcum powder. That kind of there's a kind of what it's really about, I suppose, is it's the end of a kind of civic understanding of how cities work, and it's the kind of the foreshadowing of what will happen in Canary Wharf
mm,
and other parts of London, which is a kind of privatized, enclaved non-community,
mm,
where you have a kind of concentration, but there's no sense of integration.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
um,
And I mean, oh, by the way, that estate was called Thamesmead South.
Thamesmead, that's right, Thamesmead. Thank you, John.
No worries, no
Yeah.
worries.
Is
Um,
it, it's a bit like again like Long Good Friday in '79, kind of where you have his speeches about the Docklands and all of that kind of stuff, which comes to being, but in a different kind of way. where it becomes colonized by capital, essentially. And that's what a lot of those the high rises about that really. It's about capital really. And we're at a time in '75 when capital, kind of the post-war settlement is failing, particularly in Britain, and
Mm,
and therefore we have the acceleration towards monetarism and Thatcher and the Thatcher Reagan revolution, which is all about privatization and private profit and all of that kind of stuff, and therefore the sacrificing of communitarian ideals,
mm,
council housing and all of that kind of stuff to something which is to do with profit and antagonism and competition, social competition, which the whole vertical kind of strata is kind of mapped onto, isn't it, in High Rise in a fairly crude way, even in Ballard, really, but even cruder in the film.
oh yeah, I mean, he never passed by a metaphor that he didn't grab, did he? He was
Or
always
tell us about, as in the
yeah.
book.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was that kind of. I mean, I always feel as well he's somewhat like a writer who has his ruling ideas,
Yeah,
and those ideas he's gonna bang the drum with until they enter our heads. And as interesting and as enlightening as those ideas are, in a sense, I sometimes do feel they work within a little bit like Charles Dickens creates sort of the Dickensian, Ballard creates a
mm,
Ballardian, and so it sort of becomes irrelevant as to whether they're relevant or not to an actual analysis of
mm,
society as it is. It's not,
mm,
you've he's created a Tolkien like Middle Earth with
mm,
less, I mean, less obviously escapist because, in a sense, it's a bit of a nightmare, but also, there is a little bit, the problem with Crash that I was trying to put my finger on a little bit was the idea there's no world around the people. There's no one to just stop them and say, "What the hell are you doing?" Or, no, there's no
yeah,
sensible friend or, you know, the audience isn't inscribed. There are none of the questions the audience might be asking are really there. Even the James Ballard figure is just going along for the ride, literally.
yes, yes.
Um, and that gives all of the ideas a little bit of a soft ride, an easy
Mm,
ride. I
mm,
was talking to someone at a festival once about Wes Anderson, and they were saying that Wes Anderson's best films always happen when he includes a sprinkle of anti-Wes Anderson,
mm,
so that there's something rough and realistic to bang against. The most obvious example is in his best film with Gene Hackman in The Royal Tenenbaums.
mm,
The Wes, Gene Hackman is literally someone who would punch Wes Anderson in the face, and according to Bill Murray, came very close to it during the filming of
mm.
The Royal
Right,
Tenenbaums.
yeah.
So you have that tension in the film, and you can
Mm,
feel it. I I sometimes wonder with his gurus and his disciples and his somewhat to one side detached narrator, if Ballard sometimes needs a anti-Ballard in the film, someone to, and I
mm,
I wonder if that's where the lack of female agency and the lack of
mm,
anybody who's
mm,
not white might come
mm.
as a criticism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, in a sense, Ballard is he's very definite product of his cultural construction. His formation, which is imperial, colonial, white. He comes back to Britain after the war, Cambridge, Lee's school, and then he goes to Cambridge, for a little bit to do a medical degree and doesn't finish it. Um, and he's kind of interested in the psychopathology of white bourgeoisie, really.
Mm,
That's there's a very closed set essentially. I mean, in the Drown World, which is really an interesting novel, 63, but some of the depictions of kind of African invaders to London there are kind of very egregious to say the least. Really, they're very much they're kind of an unthought unreconstructed, and that's the worst thing about it. It's kind of unthought, that kind of that he
Mm,
just draws upon colonial kind of motifs there, and they grate nowadays. But you're absolutely right about women. He never was really able to write women very successfully. I don't think they're, but it's partly because I don't think if you're looking for if you think a novel is about psychological depth and what we would understand to be character, Ballard's not a novelist.
mm,
He's
mm,
he's a kind of satirist or ironist who uses fiction as a kind of vehicle for ideas. And that's why you have the Ballardian set. That's why you have these archetypes who are pushed around very similar kind of narrative trajectories on a kind of chessboard, a terrain that he kind of devises very early, and then kind of there are different versions of that terrain which are kind of given to us in these kind of pods of novels and short stories that he writes. And so in a sense, like kind of right, like Burroughs, like Ian Sinclair, like Lawrence Stern, that he's not really a novelist in that sense. He's a writer who partly comes out of a kind of colonial adventure kind of fiction, particularly in his early fictions. So you could see Conrad, you could see other, kind of other writers of that period being really important to him. But he's not a realist.
mm,
He's not doing those things which are about investigating psychological depth, and he's not a modernist in that sense either. He's not using formal apparatuses to tell the story of Leopold and Molly Bloom. That's not his MO. Instead, he's a kind of operationalist
mm.
where he has a certain kind of set of things and he puts them into different configurations. Uh,
Which might create a problem and a contradiction in his fiction in terms of what we were talking about earlier, in terms of the externalizing of a psychopathology when you don't have an internal psychopathology to externalize. You know what I
yes,
mean? It's
yes,
sort of like, well,
yeah, yeah.
where is this coming from if you're not um if there's no interiority I'm convinced by.
Well, it's deep down below for Ballard, I think. I mean, he's a,
Right.
he's a pretty thoroughgoing Freudian, I think,
Mm,
and so in a sense, kind of the repressive hypothesis is all over his fictions, really, and people are driven by obsessions that they don't really understand, and it's true of all the kind of the films we've looked at today, from Jamie to Lang, that
mm,
kind of they're all doing stuff they don't really understand why they're doing it, and they're not capable of understanding what they're doing either, really, because if they did, that would be the grit in the oyster, and they'd say to themselves, "What the hell am I doing? Kind of
mm.
why am I doing X or Y?"
Why am I eating a dog?
Yeah,
I don't even
precisely.
like dogs.
I don't even like dog. Yeah, yeah, they don't taste very nice.
I'm a
Um,
vegetarian. Crying out loud.
yeah, so I think that's why, in a sense, there's a kind of mismatch with Ballard and film,
Mm,
because film is deeply invested. Hollywood modes of cinema anyway, in the idea of character psychology and motivation, whereas for Ballard, motivation is kind of moot,
mm,
um,
mm.
because in a sense, kind of human beings are kind of operationalized by their own subconsciousnesses, and they don't understand it really.
Yeah, yeah. You have to have a director who's going to, well, I mean, a director is always going to say, well, I think at the heart of the book that it's a relationship between a father and his child or something like that. And it's
Yeah,
like, well, that's
exactly.
not,
There's a
that's,
fundamental conflict, and
yeah, I mean,
not in Ballard, there isn't.
Paul Thomas Anderson, talking about One Battle After Another, said, "Well, at its heart, found a really moving book about a father and his child." And I was like, "What, in Vineland? Really? Was that what you
Thomas
took?"
Pynchon.
Thomas Pincher, are you kidding me? Was that seriously what you took away from that book? Because I mean, I've read it,
Yeah,
unlike
exactly. Yeah.
everybody else in the press conference. I read the bloody thing, and
Yeah,
so
no, exactly.
I don't think I go to Pynchon to get heartwarming peans
Yeah, yeah.
to
At the heart of Crash is this incredible love story between
yeah,
man and his wife who are estranged and they come together at the end
yeah.
underneath a car. on a
Yeah,
concrete
yeah,
island.
yeah, exactly. But okay, well, I'm any other filmmakers you want to mention before we finish today in terms of the sort of Ballardian I think there are a few sort of European
Yes.
filmmakers who do this. Oh, there is one actually I wanted to mention. I think they made a really good version of Home, probably before Home was made. Actually, I think it predates it. And this is a film
Okay.
called The Seventh Continent by the Austrian director Michael Haneke. It's one of his
Ah,
early 1980s films, I think, actually. So it would have predated
right.
it by quite some time. This is
Seven
about a
continents.
family, and it is shot um, with a sort of visual grammar similar to sort of a breakfast cereal commercial where you see hands pouring milk and breakfast cereal into bowls and stirring coffee cups and, you know, keys going into locks and doors closing and you see you see lots of things being done. And again, here we go with the, if you're coming here for some sort of interiority, you're coming to the wrong shop. Um, and it's about a family, and you have one scene where they go into, and again, very Ballardian moment, they go into a car wash, and the car wash obscures of the car with the, it's I think it's mum and dad and a daughter. I might be wrong about that. It's a while since I've seen it. And there seems to be some crisis going on in the car, but you are not in any way privy to it because it's obscured by the wash and the violence of the soap suds and everything. And then they come home, they have a huge meal. You've seen them shop and prepare for it, and they're like really the best. They've taken money, they've emptied their bank account, they close the doors, they finish the meal, they tear out the telephones, they burn the money, they smash everything to pieces, and they basically destroy their lives and then kill themselves because that's the seventh continent is the
Mhm.
I should have said spoiler right at the beginning of that, shouldn't I? Anyway, well, basically, I said Michael Haneke.
Yeah,
So the
so
minute I said, the minute I
yeah,
start, you
yeah.
say, oh, "Did they kill themselves?"
Yeah.
How did you
Hmm.
guess?
I suppose I should mention one a Portuguese version of his short story "Low Flying Aircraft," which and I hope the audience forgive my appalling Portuguese. Aparelho voador a baixa altitude, which is I think kind of as you mentioned off before we started, John, a very literal version of Low Flying Aircraft, which is one of Ballard's stories in which um, women start having mutated babies
Ah,
in a world in which kind of fertility drops right off the cliff. And it's about a kind of a couple who try to escape and to have their baby, which does turn out to be one of these mutated babies. But kind of in a sense, it's what the kind of I suppose the story is about is not that this is some kind of monstrosity or catastrophe, but in fact, these babies are being suited to changing climactic decision things, and in fact, they're going to be much better suited to the world to come than to human beings who are rightly going to be dying off. So it's a really low budget film, but very nicely done. It's full of very nice kind of Ballardian images of kind of biplanes and beaches and a car buried in the beach and kind of abandoned hotels, and so it's got a very nice atmosphere. It's very sensitive, I think, towards that Ballardian set that I talked about, and so it's on YouTube. Well worth checking out.
excellent. That's great suggestion, great recommendation for us to leave our listeners with. I think our next writer, I get the feeling we should do maybe Philip K. Dick. What do you feel? I mean, I know
Yeah,
there's
happy.
another one that's right on the nose, but
Yeah,
of our,
yeah.
I'm currently reading Exegesis. The
Oh Lord, are you?
yes,
Good for you.
it's there's a bit of me that wants to. I mean, if I was being a real ponce, I would say it's the best Philip K. Dick novel he ever wrote. As sort of because it's obviously not a novel. It's his sort of collected
cut
mail.
down from a million words that he was writing. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's him on drugs, just writing to
Yeah,
various sort of.
barbiturates. He's gobbling the barbiturates and just shooting out loads of stuff, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There was somebody was saying to me that you can tell in his novels when the barbiturates are running low.
Low.
He's sort of like it's like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then the oh fuck. Oh, I'm sleepy.
Despair.
Yeah, there was he saw a bed. He went
The
towards the
the
bed.
tomb world enveloped him.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, precisely. You saw the skull beneath the skin. Um, yeah, so I think that's going to be our next one that will be coming along in a few weeks' time. But I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'd love to hear any feedback you have, dear listener. Comments are always welcome. Emails, you can contact me relatively easily. And please remember to share this on all the social media platforms that you can. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Brian Baker, for a wonderful conversation.
Thanks again, John.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.